delay until they come back and have the camera on and all that good stuff. So just thought that I would. Time to go? Well, many of you know that I go by the moniker Rev Z. And most of you know that my last name is Zupan, so it's really fitting. And it's really fitting for today because are you surprised to know that I have an affinity for Z words? And guess what we're talking about today? When I was thinking about how I was going to start this talk and things that I was going to share, I thought of a time in my life when I perhaps went pretty far with that affinity to being attached to the letter Z. I was the payroll person at a government contractor. I was actually the payroll department. And we had gone from 8 employees to over 800. And I was one of the original hires. And in all that time, all of those 6, 7, 8 years, I was always the very last person in the employee listing. And I didn't realize how attached I had gotten to that until we hired an engineer whose last name was Zaromsky. Z-U-R-O-M-S-K-Y. Notice that is after Z-U-P. Can you tell where I'm going with this? As I entered his name into our internal records, into the labor records that were important to this company, into the payroll records that, I remind you, are legal documents, without any conscious thought, I misspelled it, Z-U-M. Took a while for me to notice. And the thing is, and this is the embarrassing part, and if you see a flush coming up on my face, I didn't realize how embarrassed I was until this moment. I actually considered leaving it misspelled. Now, I didn't, but I considered it. I've come to think of that in the context of this talk as misapplied zeal. About my position as the last person, about the power of my role as the payroll person, about my attachment to being the last person alphabetically. And to this day, when I walk up and say I'm probably the last person on your listing, I think back to that time when that was not the case, and I laugh. And I'm still really a little bit attached to being the last person alphabetically. So here at Crystal Coast Unity, for the past actually couple of months, we have been exploring Unity's 12 powers. I wasn't too sure when Catherine first told us that we were going to be talking about these 12 powers that I could get excited about them. I, like many of my classmates, didn't feel very attached to the 12 powers. And truth be told, I suppressed barely a sigh of disappointment when she told me that we would be talking about these for 12 long weeks. And I shared it with her because it was after a board meeting. And to Catherine's everlasting credit, she did not say, "What are you talking about?" She did not say, "Why, they're wonderful, let me tell you why." She said, "Wow, that's interesting." And I rushed to defend my position by pulling in all of these classmates and colleagues of hers who I know just don't especially feel very attached to the 12 powers. And to her ongoing everlasting credit, she didn't get defensive about it at all. She listened, she was open, and that gave me the opening to change my mind to move that bus. So my resistance to the 12 powers has really changed over these past couple of months. You might say that I did move that bus. I renounced that. Catherine has told us that these 12 powers are seeds of greatness. Charles Filmore wrote about them in his book, The 12 Powers of Man. And Charles Filmore, you may or may not ever have seen a picture of him. And I realized that I hadn't seen one here, and I thought, wow, I can share that with you guys. He was an interesting guy, very interesting guy. Prolific writer, self-taught man, had an engineering kind of mind. And he told us about faith, and Catherine shared with us too. Faith is the foundation. Faith is the essential first ingredient for a life of peace and abundance. Catherine reminded us that doubt is a part of the path of faith, and that faith is the good, rich soil in which other seeds of greatness are planted. That the practice of our faith and the use of doubt in reaching there is an intimate thing. Our thoughts are the soil of our faith, and we can choose those thoughts which we focus upon. That we can practice trust, and faith will follow and grow. In the second Sunday about this, Catherine told us the story of David and Goliath to illustrate the power strength. She shared Charles Filmore's definition that, quote, strength is the energy of God. In man, it causes freedom from weakness, stability of character, power to withstand temptation, capacity to accomplish. Strength is physical, mental, and spiritual. All strength originates in spirit. Moving to the next Sunday, we heard about the marriage of wisdom and love. These are the third and fourth of our 12 powers. Catherine advised us, as did Charles Filmore, to develop them together, and that wisdom and love are a balance of masculine and feminine. They give us the tension of the head and the heart. And the result of this combination is a path to spiritual discernment that allows us to serve wisely, that allows us to serve ourselves first and others. And then next, Reverend Denise spoke on power, connected with dominion and mastery. Reverend Denise reminded us that this spiritual power encompasses the human ego and goes beyond. Charles Filmore taught that the voice, the word, is the most direct avenue of the expression of spiritual power. And Reverend Denise told us that we must apply the word for our own redemption, our own transformation first, so that we might develop this faculty. And then we come to one of my favorites, just even in words, imagination. Charles Filmore wrote that it is through the imagination that the formless takes form. I made this. It appeared first in my mind. This is the result of imagination. Scripture tells us that God made us in his likeness and image. Imagination is one of my favorite 12 powers. Reverend Catherine's talk, I Hear and I Follow, was on the powers of understanding and will. Filmore believed that these two powers, again, were feminine and masculine in nature, and therefore, again, best developed together. He wrote, "No one ever attains spiritual consciousness without striving for it. Make your will receptive to the higher understanding." And then we got to order, a force that governs everything. Reverend Catherine reminded us that divine order in itself is irrefutable evidence of God. When we develop this power, we can live free from regret over the past and worry over the future. We can live in the present moment in the experience of the always now. And then last Sunday, Charlie gave us the fabulous Move That Bus talk on the power of renunciation. He told us that he prefers to call it release or letting go, and that when we won't let go, we condemn ourselves to carrying around a big black bag of negativity. Charlie reminded us that Charles Filmore himself was a master of letting go. Charles Filmore said, "I reserve the right to change my mind." With renunciation, actually with all of the 12 powers, the point is to move forward with grace and ease. The point is to, as Charlie told us, experience heaven on earth. As Filmore told us, it's the way to get to Christ consciousness here and now. So today, I have the grand opportunity of sharing the power of Zeal with you. And it's an opportunity and a true privilege. As generally happens with everything, in my experience of writing, or actually I sort of synthesize my Sunday talks, I have broadened and deepened my understanding and appreciation for all of these contexts. I have released, let go of so much resistance. I have moved that bus over and over and over again. And you could say that I now have some zeal for the 12 powers. Zeal is such an old-fashioned word. I mean, it's one that almost defines itself when you say it. Zeal, enthusiasm, energy, zest. There is a Charles Filmore quote that many of the old-timers in my home church delighted in reciting, and honestly, I heard it with an inward groan every time they did this. But now it sort of sounds a little different to me. This is the quote: "I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm, and spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me." Seemed a really good resource for this talk title. What do you think? So in the Charles Filmore book, The 12 Powers of Man, published in 1930, this is one of the definitions that we read. Zeal is the impulse to go forward, the urge behind all things. Without zeal, stagnation, inertia, death would prevail throughout the universe. The man without zeal is like an engine without steam or an electric motor without current. Energy is zeal in emotion, and energy is the forerunner of every effect. Sometimes, though, zeal takes us places in a less than conscious way. And this was the case for me when I heard myself saying one evening in 1998 in a gathering of women in my house that Ellen Davenport, who was then in ministerial school, had asked me to gather so that she could visit with them in the break between her first and second years of seminary. And I heard myself say, "I think ministerial school is in my future." And I had no idea who said that. I didn't know I'd ever thought about that before. And honestly, for probably about a year afterwards, I did everything I could to not remember, to not pay attention that I had said that. I actually also stopped going to church in the mistaken belief that if you don't go to church, you can't be a minister. But when I started to accept it, it put my quest for an undergraduate degree, a Bachelor of Science in Accounting, in a different light, because the program was changing and they required an undergraduate degree in order to apply to ministerial school. And I went through the application process in 2002, and I wrote everything that they asked you to do. And I was invited for interviews, and I was so sure that I had done and checked every single box that you needed to check, that even though I said, I know that this is a God thing and that they'll make the decision, and if I'm redirected, I'm really okay with that. But I knew I would be going to ministerial school to be part of the class of 2005, which started in July of 2003. So you can imagine how surprised I was when I got the letter in my office in this payroll department, after I'd already quit all the different stuff in my life and detached from everything, that no, I was redirected, that it wasn't my time. I was stunned. And then I realized that the emotion I was feeling was relief. R-E-L-I-E-F, relief. How could that be? And so fortunately, I hadn't quit my job and I hadn't sold my condo. And I had this grand opportunity to figure out what I wanted my life to look like, because I detached from all these things. And so putting things back in meant I could do it with choice. What was I enthusiastic about? I spent a lot of time that first year saying, when somebody would say, would you, instead of saying yes, which is my ordinary response, I would say, let me take that to prayer. Because I discovered that I say yes really, really easily, and sometimes no is the enthusiastic, zealot answer for me. So I got that gift and so many more out of my redirection. And the other thing that I really got to figure out was, what is mine to do? I said that if I was redirected, that it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when, and that I would just reapply until they took me. But I knew that wasn't the right thing for me to do, that I needed to sit with this, that I needed to be with it and step into the flow of it. And so every time an application process came around annually, I would say, what's mine to do? And at a point, I got, it's time to reapply. And so I did. And by that time, the program had changed dramatically to become a 3-year master's program in divinity, which meant that there were really big academic requirements, and you also had to apply separately for the ministerial path, and you could go to school and not be on the ministerial path, and it was a bigger, different program. And so I took each step that went in front of me just as it showed up and as I was directed to do, by the inner knowing, by my connection with the divine, which is what Zeal allows us to do. Because Zeal is not always noisy. Sometimes it's a lot more quiet, uplifting energy. There's a 1941 book, Teach Us to Pray, that was co-authored by Charles and his second wife, Cora Filmore. And it contains this passage. Zeal, intensity, enthusiasm is essential to the achievement of any and every great purpose. We usually judge zeal by the noise it makes, but noise is not characteristic of the zeal that overcomes seemingly insurmountable obstacles and wheels them into line with its quiet yet mighty energy of purpose. So I applied for the academic portion, and I was entered into school. And then I put my house on the market, and I quit my job, and I waited. And my sister and brother-in-law, in the space of 3 weeks, got word that they needed to move from North Carolina to Texas, and they put their house on the market, and it sold pre-listing. And they were moved to Texas. And I was still in Northern Virginia, sitting in a house that was on the market that hadn't seen very, and honestly, I was a little bit annoyed. I mean, I was pretty sure I was following what I was supposed to be doing here, but things just didn't seem to be going along. And so I went to Unity Village and I interviewed for the ministerial path, and I was accepted into that, and that was great. And I came back home to Northern Virginia to hear that one of my brothers had needed a biopsy for a tumor, and could I help him out? That was great. And then Dad, who lived down here, wanted to have an operation to fix a hernia, and in the course of being cleared for that surgery, it was discovered that he needed quintuple bypass heart surgery. And so I was here for that. And anybody who knows about heart bypass surgery, somebody needs to be on premise with you 24/7 for the 6 weeks of follow-up, or you need to be in a rehab center, and my dad has never been good at being in any kind of rehab or whatever. And so one of my brothers and I played team tag on 95, driving down here, crossing, waving at each other as we traded off weeks. And then I moved to Missouri because I'd found a house there and bought it while I was interviewing for the ministerial path. And if I had 2 houses, maybe I should be living in the place I wanted to be rather than the place I wanted to let go. I thought, I can move spirit along, especially if I'm willing to throw money at it. And that was, as you wouldn't know, but that was in 2007, 2008. Do you remember what was happening to the housing market then? Yeah. So I put my house on the market and at a point where it was starting to go like this, and I bought a house at the time when the market was going like this, and now I own 2 houses, both of which are losing value. And it's like, it's a darn good thing I only buy houses I like. Because I could still enjoy it even if I was losing money. And it's like, it's money. It's replaceable. There are things in life that are not. Like your dad regaining full health after a quintuple heart bypass, and your brother having a tumor excised with no problem at all. This is the brother that I traded off on. He was helping Dad out a week after that surgery. They tested the growth. It was cancer, but he's fine to this day. So I moved to Missouri. I lived in that house. I had a great time. And I graduated and was ordained in June of 2012. And I was very clear about one thing. I did not want to be a church minister. I developed a ministry called Leaning Into Loss. I knew that I wanted to speak sometimes, but I didn't want to be a church minister. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I didn't want to be a church minister. And over the years, during and several times before and after seminary, I had offered to move to Morehead City if my dad needed me to, in order to remain living independently. And honestly, I know I've told you this before, but I never thought I'd have to make good on that offer. I really thought that I would just get all of the kudos from, aren't you wonderful that you're willing to lift up your life that way. And well, following Dad's second fall and hip break that he mended without surgery, about 4 years apart, he was living with my sister in Raleigh, and he started not just agitating and not just being nasty occasionally to family members, but he started slipping into this deep depression that was extremely painful for, in particular, my sister to watch. And Anne finally said, this is not about making him miserable for the rest of his life. Maybe we need to let him go home and see if he can do it. And when you come here for Easter, would you just drive him home and spend a week with him and see whether or not we can make it work? And I did, and that was a year ago, and we could. And I again reiterated my offer to move here. And my dad never actually said yes. He just sort of started acting like it would happen. When you come back here, when you've moved back here, he never said, that would be great. He just started accepting it. And I moved here with the intention of being here for 1 year. I have stuff back in Kansas City in storage, my good stuff. Like the stuff that I have here isn't good. It is, it's great. And I have an apartment, and I had purchased a membership, an apartment complex in a cooperative, a senior cooperative, that is being built as I stand here and you sit here today in Kansas City in Lee Summit, just outside of Unity Village. And I discovered along the way that this idea that I would only be here for a year and Dad better die on my timeline after all anyway, when my dad has never done anything on my timeline or anybody else's for that matter. And when I just am enjoying my connection with him so much, and when you guys are family, this is my spiritual community. I don't have community like this back in Kansas City. I'm here. I've released that membership. I'm here. And it looks like Dad may live forever. So I consider that to be a practical application of Zeal. You know, it was working through me. I had no idea. The connection here, the joy that I feel with this community, the enthusiasm that we all exhibit, the way that we care for each other, that is Zeal in action. Sometimes it's noisy, like it was on Thursday at the concert, which was fabulous. Sometimes it's more quiet. Sometimes it shows up in the form of guest musicians. Sometimes, always, it shows up in the form of our home musicians. Zeal in action. I've discovered that zeal, like the other 12 powers, other 11 actually, must be in present experience. They can't work in us when we're back in the past or off into the future. It needs to be in the here and now. And so all of the knowledge and all of the learning that we've got is fine. And the reason that I share my stories with you is because, not just because they're my stories, not just to illustrate the point, but to ask you also to notice in your life, in your story, where's the zeal? Where's the learning? Where's the power? Where's the will and order? Where's the understanding? Where's the love and wisdom? How are they in play in your life? Did something that I said today about my journey and the way that I look at it, sometimes with utmost seriousness, which when I think about it starts to make me laugh because that's ridiculous. You know, life is not really lived in the serious. Life is lived in the fullness, in the enjoyment, in the humor. So, all the knowledge, all the learning is fine. And spiritual law is knowledge and learning. But too often we remain in the head about it. So it's really important, I think, that we increase our capacity for zeal, because that will actually increase the level of zeal in our lives. And that will give us the Christ consciousness that the 12 powers are all about. So let's return to the fifth principle for just a moment. Knowledge of these spiritual truths is not enough to create a life of joy, service, and abundance. We must practice them in every area of our lives. So let's talk about practice. This series of talks on the 12 powers has contained many suggestions for practical applications for all of the powers. And here are 3 suggestions that I've come up with. in a way to increase our capacity for zeal. The first one from my story, slow down and listen. You know, my experience with my dad, and actually my experience with my hip, has really supported this. Some of you know I need a hip replacement, my right hip. It's something that I didn't discover until I moved here. And when I say slow down and listen, for me, a part of the slowing down and listening was listening to my body. What is my body telling me about this? Over the course of the past 5 or 6 months, and actually longer than that if I really think about it, I had a lot of zeal and enthusiasm drained from me because of the ongoing chronic wearing down of what I didn't recognize was pain. So if there are places like that in our body is trying to tell us something. It's giving us a message. Slow down and listen and pay attention, because there are things that are ours to do, and there are other things that are not. I discovered that the anti-inflammatory that I was on was causing me some real physical problems. But until I slowed down and listened because of the results of a blood test, I never tumbled to the fact that the twitch in my eye and the horrible itching and the swelling that I had that was going on was because of the anti-inflammatory. And so a trade-off on a little bit of pain is okay on that one for me. Slow down and listen. This requires being in the present moment. A second suggestion: be willing to participate in the cycle of renewal. Many of us like to give, many of us like to receive. Usually, one of those is more of a challenge for us than the other. Which one is yours? Do you like being the giver, as I often do? It is hard for me to receive. No, I'll do it myself. Thank you very much. I mean, I'm nice about saying no, but I'm still saying no. When often the challenge would be to accept the gift that someone is giving me. Let's be open to this. And I actually invite you to take this on as a personal challenge during the course of this next week. Sort of step back and notice which one is more difficult for you. And then allow yourself the opportunity to become more easy with it, more comfortable with it. And I remind you that it is only in community that we discover the tension between the two parts of the cycle of renewal. In order to be open to giving and receiving, we need to be connected with others. And the third practical step that I offer you is to take the opportunity to become an observer of your own life, to use the faculty of mind to witness, to watch yourself. Maybe you'll notice that the music you listen to can change your emotions. Allow yourself to be lifted. Maybe you'll notice that you have a not so positive story about something in your life. Allow yourself to notice and allow yourself to not make that mean anything except you have this chance to change. We can't change without being aware, without being conscious of what is. This week, simply observe and love yourself for the willingness to watch what is. So, in Dynamics for Living, which is a book that was published in 1967, almost 20 years after Charles Filmore's death in 1948, he tells us that zeal is intensity, ardor, enthusiasm, the inward fire of the soul that urges man onward regardless of caution. It is the affirmative impulse of existence. Its command is, go forward. I get to go forward later this afternoon when I start out on a road trip back to Unity Village. I'm very excited about the opportunity to be back in this gorgeous place. This is overlooking the newly renovated fountains. That's the education building that you see with those people in front of it. The rose gardens are off over here. You can't see them. Silent Unity's building is over here. The view is from the administration building on the campus. I'm really looking forward to being back there and witnessing the graduation and ordination of the newest class of Masters of Divinity and ministers in Unity on Thursday evening. And I'm enthusiastic about road trips anyway. So we get to see Zeal around us every single day. And in my life, maybe in yours too, examples abound of what we might term misapplied zeal, energy that tries to control or disrupt. For instance, our current political climate is perhaps, well, I won't say anymore. So I invite us to focus our attention on those places where life and love and presence are affirming and uplifting. We have the choice always available in this moment. And really, we know this moment is the only place that we have any power at all. I invite you this week to express in ways that support the good that we in Unity say is everywhere present. I invite you to embody zeal, to express zeal in your very own unique way. I invite you to consciously be a positive influence in your world. Blessings.